Tanner, it just occurred to me that I should show you all something. I don't know if you can see it, but there's this like smudge line on my floor. That's the cutoff of my video camera. So anytime that you step across that line to sharpen your pencil, you're not broadcasting yourself. So if you're like in witness protection or something, you shouldn't, just so you know. And if you don't mind being seen on the internet, then you're welcome to do that. I just have a legal responsibility to protect your privacy, and this is the broadcast zone, and everybody else should know that too. There's a line on the ground. You may not have known that I was starting the video. So I went to go start it, and I looked on the screen. I was like, oh, Tanner's there. So luckily, that's an alias, and your identity is safe. I didn't broadcast it. So. Your secret is safe with us. Okay. First thing I want to do is make sure that everybody got the same notes yesterday. I kind of slopped up this lecture a little bit. It got kind of messy. Different periods got different terminology and stuff. So I'm going to point to a vocab term and I'm going to say that word, and you go, yes, you explained this yesterday, I know what you're saying, or no, I do not know what you're saying. This didn't come up in our period. So you show me by shaking your head or nodding, okay? Please look up. Trophic, producer in the second different types of consumers, also known as herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, apex. Type. Ecotones, edge effects. Nutrients cycle, energy flows one way. Did we discuss a trophic cascade in your class? Yeah. Beautiful. So now, everything we've talked about so far, all day yesterday, was about food web issues. What you might call trophic relationships. This is the most basic ecology. If you're like a third grader, everybody eats, so everybody can imagine food web relationships. This part's easy. Food layers. But there are other types of relationships. We call them community level interactions, and this is what I want to talk about today. It's going to take me almost the entire hour ahead to explain like 5 vocabulary terms. And I could just like rattle off the definitions and you probably know it, but I'd like you to remember these because they're kind of interesting examples. So I'm going to tell you the story of different community level interactions by giving you examples that are kind of famous. Sometimes, when you remove a species from an ecosystem, it's not a big deal. Did we talk about complexity yesterday? Complex ecosystems are more resilient. Did we discuss that? So, you know, if you get rid of Jose, there's 10 million good teachers here. Your high school education would continue just fine. You could say that our school is resilient because You don't rely on a single funny looking fat guy. Resiliency. But I want to start today by talking about keystone species, those species that make a really big difference when they're removed from an ecosystem. And the best way to tell the story of the keystone species is to talk about architecture. By coincidence, is anybody here interested in architecture and design? So maybe you know this better than me. I'm pretty sure I got this, but maybe I'm wrong. There were these dudes, I guess dudes and ladies, named the Etruscans or Etruscans, and they invented this type of construction called the Etruscan or Etruscan arch. Did I get that right? Called the Etruscan or Etruscan arch, like this? Here's something I think I got this right. Something I've heard. So doorways used to be really small because when you build like stone construction, stone's really heavy. So you try to make an opening with like a stack of stones and a big stone on top, and when you keep building the wall, the weight will snap the header, so to speak, the one over the opening. So the doors used to be really small. Etruscans figured out this design. They would make a big pile of dirt, and then they would stack stones over it, and when they put in this one critical stone, the keystone, they could remove that pile of dirt, and you can keep adding rocks, and no matter how much weight you put here, please watch my fingers, all that weight comes down onto the keystone, which is keyed, it's got that cut, so that all that weight transfers sideways to the next one, and eventually, please look up, all the downward pressure on the Etruscan arch is translated by these down to the ground. There's also an outward force that you can combat by making your wall really long. So theoretically, until you pulverize stone, you can make these as big as you want, and then you can put as much weight as you want on top of them. Your only structural limitation is the structural integrity of the rock. And that was a big whoop. At a time when doorways to enter a village were kind of small, the Etruscans built these huge archways. You could like drive a carriage with like flag bearers through those gates. See them from far, far away. You'd be like, oh my God, look at that walled city. They must be some geniuses. Look at that huge entryway. And the Etruscans were like, yeah, we're pretty cool, man. We got these big doorways because we're smart. Of course, if you were getting into a war with the Etruscans and you wanted to keep them shut in, have you all heard of siege warfare? Mm-hmm. If you wanted to keep them all shut in and starve them behind the walls of their village, all you had to do was break their doorway, and their doorway depends on this one critical piece, the keystone. So we call keystone species those whose ecosystem collapses when removed. You get rid of the species and the whole ecosystem falls apart. So let's see if you can predict what's going to happen. If I grab this middle wood block and I pull it out of the way, what's going to happen? What's hilarious is that's true, and it used to do that because when I bought this, the wood was still kind of fresh, but it's gotten really old. That's like 15 years old. So it's all dried out and it's really porous. So now, watch this. Keystone species are those which are especially critical to their ecosystem. You remove them and nothing happens. Watch this. Okay, that's my big valuable metaphor. You can get rid of keystone species and everything is fine. Nobody cares. I think I can, I've never gotten 3. There's no way, right? Maybe if I did this one. Okay. I could have probably gotten, I could have tried harder. Anyway. There's this interesting thing in ecology, which we find some species are just a little bit more important than others. You know what, California condor? Not important. Like, honestly, as far as we can tell, the California condor is kind of forgettable. We spent like bazillions of dollars, and it was basically going to go extinct anyway. It's a relic. It's like a leftover. We probably should have just let them die.
Are they still some of the zoo?
Oh yeah. There's a lot. There's some in the wild. But we spent a ton of money trying to preserve them. And as it happens, they were pretty much a dead end, so to speak. They used to be really common during the last ice age, like saber-toothed tigers and like dire wolves and stuff, all the red tarpon stuff. And since then, they've basically been going extinct. They're just kind of scraping by, and then we felt bad that we were driving into extinction, so we spent like, I don't know, $1.8 billion or some absurd number trying to help this relic that will probably go extinct any minute now. And nobody cares, because they're not a keystone species, but some are. Here's the most famous one. Anybody know what that is?
Sea otter.
It's a greased cat.
It's a rabbit. See, I can not believe whatever I want. My whole life not believing things. Sea otters are adorable. You all know about them. We can talk a little bit about sea otters. They're social. They're mammals. They live mostly in the ocean. They're one of the only mammals that spend their entire life in the ocean. Sea mammals can come on land. Sea otters can come on land, but they often don't. Born at sea, die at sea. They sleep at sea. They wrap kelp around their legs so they won't drift, and they hold hands in a chain of sleeping sea otters. If that doesn't make you go, oh, you're not human. I've seen them. The place where I fish the most in the fall has like a thriving population. There's like a huge gang of them, 15 or 20. And every now and then I'll wake up in the morning and like look out of the boat to pier or whatever, and they'll be like right there, just like sleeping right next to my boat, and they're so cute, these greased little cats. Of course, you can imagine being a mammal in the ocean kind of sucks. Maybe you've experienced this. Because it's hard to be warm-blooded when you're in like a giant heat sink. So they have really nice fur. And some early European explorer figured this out. And thank God these sea otters are so stupid. They're like really gullible and curious. You don't even need firearms. Like you just take like a rowboat out into the kelp and be like smash and like break up like a sea urchin or like a clam or whatever and throw it overboard, and they're like, ee, and like come over to your boat. And you can literally just have a spike and just like hook them and put them in the boat. Just picking up meat. And I don't think that they're very good to eat, but that fur is really nice. It's like pretty much the best fur on the planet. It's kind of a debatable issue, but not very debatable. Really nice fur. There's a few places where you can still feel sea otter pelts. Yeah, Monterey Bay Aquarium has like a thing, and there's like some other place in Big Sur where you can do like a walk along the cliffs, and anyway, a few places. Well, they're gullible, they're stupid, they live near shore, they don't even try to hide. They can't hide because they can't hold their breath very long, so sooner or later they just come back up like, oh, I got you. And so we made a lot of hats and jackets in very short order. We wiped out sea otters. And, I want to baby step this. So this is like one of the critical moments in classic ecology. This is one of the most famous examples. Turns out that getting rid of sea otters had all of these surprising consequences that were really bad, sort of like a real keystone where the entire kelp ecosystem fell apart. Anybody know what sea otters eat? Bravo. Anybody know what sea urchins eat? Good job. So this is one of these, where trophic cascade, food chain issues, you get rid of this one, and you get too many of these, which eat up all of that. But now comes a new concept. The kelp is a critical habitat for all sorts of sea life. Fun detail that a lot of you may have forgotten, kelp is the fastest growing thing on Earth. In some perfect scenarios, like winter in the Santa Barbara Channel, for example, kelp can grow 2 feet in 1 day. That is an inch per hour. That means you can literally watch it grow. I don't know if you guys realize this, but kelp, because it's one of the most productive things on the planet, has a whole swarm of primary consumers that eat the kelp, which means there must be all these secondary consumers that eat them, which is why this is some of the best fishing on the planet. Not to mention all the stuff that maybe doesn't eat the kelp but lives in the kelp. Great white sharks like to hunt around the kelp. Maybe you've heard Santa Claus Lane. There's big old fish that go to hide in there, like anybody here free dive? White sea bass? So this was probably the first and the most famous example where humans like killed off something and then like, holy crap, this entire house was built around that one thing. We got a few $1 million worth of otter pelt and lost many billions of dollars worth of coastal fisheries. Sorry, billions of dollars worth of coastal fisheries. Now, please look up. This is where your notes are. The sea otter is, please look up, classic ecology, because it's just about food webs. It's a trophic cascade. So a disruption here caused a disruption there, caused a disruption here. Trophic cascade. Waterfall, ripple effect. Okay? That's classic ecology. Ecology for babies, just the food web. This is something that we use to teach elementary school kids all the time. If you go to Monterey, this is how they teach you basic ecology for little kids. Nice. But aside from the food web issue, this is the first example that I'll give you of many of a habitat relationship. Imagine this. I could go back to the northwest redwood forest and I could add arrows. That is incomplete. You did your best, but it's incomplete. Watch. Do bald eagles eat redwoods? Somebody tell me to answer that question. Do bald eagles eat redwood? No. But anyway, I could draw an arrow. Why did I draw an arrow from the tree going to the bald eagle?
Because it's like the energy from the tree like is transferred throughout.
No, the energy ones are already there. This is a different reason.
Habitat?
Habitat relationships. It depends on the tree for another reason. It's not just food. You see, the Steller's jay doesn't eat the tree either, but that's an important place for it to be. Raccoons do not eat trees. Rats don't eat this type of tree. Elk don't eat this tree, but they need it for shade. Bobcat doesn't eat the tree, but it might use the old logs to hide in. Salamanders don't eat the tree, but they raise their babies in the needles beneath the tree. Bracken ferns don't eat the tree, but they grow on it. So look at all these other connections I can make that aren't food. This is a habitat web. It's not a food web, it's a habitat web. And I'm going to keep going. We call those community level interactions. Get ready for a definition. Those are relationships that are non-trophic. Relationships that are non-trophic. So it's not about energy flow, it's other stuff, like habitat. Almost everything in a forest needs the trees. Almost everything. But it's not food. Look at all the stuff here that either lives in the tree or under the leaves. Or in the old logs. Look at that. I made all these relationships. Here comes another keystone species, which is a good example of another community level interaction. You guys feeling the rhythm now? Keystones? Anybody know what that is? Sea star, that's right. People call them starfish, but that's probably the wrong word. Anybody know what these things eat? People who did the kelp might know. They eat bivalves and mollusks, like oysters, mussels, scallops, clams. And we found out how important the sea star was when we got rid of them. So oyster divers will occasionally go find oysters that have a little hole and they're empty, because sea stars have this hard little beak, and they'll walk over onto an oyster or a clam or a mussel or a scallop, and then they go and they like grind a little tiny funnel-shaped hole. You can find them on shells on the beach all the time. You keep your eyes open, it's like a perfectly round, like a funnel shape. And they make that hole, yeah.
How do they know where they're going?
They see with their feet. Wait, maybe they don't know where they're going. It's like you fumbling around in the dark. You don't know, but you can tell what the fridge is because you feel it. So maybe they just find out where they went. Right? That's probably the right way to say that. They don't know where they're going. They find out where they went.
They have brains? How do they
No.
How can they store memories?
I don't know. Who says that they have memories?
You did?
Really?
You said they remember where they went, like...
Oh no, I think they just find out where they are. How's that? I don't know, man. I'm not trying to give them any benefit of the doubt, cognitively speaking. Like I don't know. They're just bubbling about. Okay, kind of like me.
all sorts of different sea stars, they all eat stuff with a shell. And if you're a diver who goes to get stuff with a shell, your job is pretty tough. And when you find an empty shell, you're like, dang it, another empty mussel or whatever. Tanner, you better be really interested by something on your lap that isn't your phone. Oh. Smoke. So all the oyster fishermen got together with all the mussel fishermen, got together with all the scallop fishermen, got together with all the abalone fishermen, and they're like, guys, are you as fed up as I am? So they all came up with a plan. They said, let's go down there, and when we find any sea stars, we'll bring them up on the docks, and we'll chop them up into little pieces and throw them back in the ocean. Trying to be a really bad idea, because anybody know what happens when you chop up a sea star in little pieces? Any part that has this part of their stomach will grow back into a new sea star. So okay, plan B. And then they went back and they said, okay, you got a plan, I got a plan. And they got them all on the boat, and then they would drive close to shore, and they would frisbee them onto the sand and feed them to the seagulls. And that worked. And in a few areas, divers drove the sea star to the brink of extinction and totally shot themselves in the foot, and their fisheries collapsed. And this is an interesting example of another type of relationship. It's tough to explain. It gets wordy. So you better get ready for this, because it's not necessarily easy to explain, and you will, the College Board likes this one. Watch me. In any given year, all four of these might be spread out on the same rocks. But if these are the most common, what's the sea star gonna eat the most of? Clams, right? So the ones that are good at eating clams will have a lot of babies, and the next generation of sea stars will be especially good at eating. And over a period of a few years, please look up, sea stars will provide downward pressure on this population because it's the most common food. The ones with the beak shaped for clams, you're going to eat the most clams and have the most babies, so sea stars will become more clam killers, right? And if they're all competing for space on the reef, over a few years as clams are driven downward, what's going to happen to the populations of oysters, mussels, and scallops? It's going to go up, that's right. Because sea stars, just by eating whatever's most common, will open up space for the competitors of the clam. Right? In the period where the divers drove all the sea stars to extinction, it happened to be a good decade for mussels. And with no sea stars, those mussels kept cruising. Which of course means they used up all the dirt, all the rocks, I mean. So all those divers would come to the harbor and go, hey, I got mussels, everybody, I got mussels. And everybody's like, boo! He brought mussels, she brought mussels. Guess what I ate yesterday? Mussels. Nobody wants your stupid mussels. Oh, divers are like, but I got so many mussels. And everybody's like, yeah, but that's the only thing anybody eats around here, so nobody wants to pay for that because it sucks. Nobody wants your stupid mussels. We're like, go back and get me some clams. No, but no clams are growing. So this was a really sad story. It collapsed because sometimes predators maintain diversity. Go figure. There's a term for this. It's called the predator effect. And the idea is you keep the winner from extinguishing all the losers. In a couple decades, one of those will be the winner, so the predators keep them down and everybody gets to stay in the mix. As long as nobody can take over the reef, diversity survives there.
And you know, we have now measured this in sharks and reef diversity, wolves and prairie diversity, lions and savanna diversity, big fish and little fish diversity, pretty much everywhere. Predators eat whatever's easiest to find, which keeps all the other ones in the game. As conditions change, they all have their day in the sun, and the predator shifts to them so that all the other losers can stay in the game until conditions change, and used to be last year's losers now become more common, so the predator will keep you down, and now this loser might in a decade have a chance to be the winner. There's a term for this. It's called competitive exclusion, where somebody keeps winning so they kick out all the losers, and predators keep you from doing that. It's called predator effect. Limit competitive exclusion. See? Limit competitive exclusion. Keep the winners from wiping out the losers. Here's why this one is funny. When you look at the kelp ecosystem, you know that a bunch of stuff needs the kelp for habitat. Here's a wacky thing. The little fish need the shark as much as the shark needs the little fish. Watch. There's a great white shark. There's a calico bass. Okay, watch me. That arrow is food. Energy of the calico goes into the great white shark. But get ready for this. I want everybody to watch. The calico gets something from the shark. The shark will protect the calico from other species out competing it. The species who are eaten by a predator need the predator to prevent competitive exclusion. It's called predator effect. Predators maintain total diversity. When you get rid of a predator, their prey species start to go extinct. That's a crazy thought. That's pretty earth-shattering. That's like 1990s, year 2000 ecology. That's kind of new. We're starting to look through the fossil record, and it looks really clear. Predator goes extinct, and then all their prey species start to disappear because one of them outcompetes the others. What's this?
Bear.
What?
Bear.
What kind of bear?
Grizzly.
Grizzly bear. I don't know if you all realize this, but grizzly bears eat salmons. I don't know if you all realize this, but salmons spend most of their life in the ocean. They swim up the rivers, usually the river where they were born, to mate. They fertilize eggs and leave the embryos to develop in fresh water. Those embryos suck at swimming. So during flood water, those embryos get kicked out to the sea. When baby salmons hit salt water, they start growing big and they get all gnarly and different. Anybody know what you call a salmon that never reached the ocean? Trout.
Really?
Yeah, trout are landlocked salmon
That's why they look so similar?
because they're the same thing. Of course, that rainbow trout, if it hits salt water early enough, will turn on a different type of development. It'll become steelhead salmon. And it'll go around the oceans and eat stuff until currents bring it back to what feels like home, and if it feels right, they'll just start rushing up the river to make their babies. And these are fantastic natural events.
Is that the same for like all types of trout? Like, isn't there like brown trout and stuff? Or
Sea-run German browns.
like when we went to Montana, we caught a bunch of different trout that were different.
So trout have been spread around freshwaters by humans because they're fun and easy to grow. Historically, they've migrated all over the place during flood moments and stuff. There are some that have been landlocked for so long they're genetically distinct. So there are what you might call permanent trout that don't really have a genetic analog in saltwater. Anyway, when all those salmons come back up the river, the grizzly bears party, yeah.
Does that mean trout are healthier because they don't have the same mercury levels that salmon do?
Well, I guess they would. I mean, in the ocean, they don't really aggregate very much mercury. They're pretty low on the food chain, so they're not really. We can explain why certain animals end up with more. But yeah, I mean, they would probably have a little less. Since they're both eating stuff that's smaller and they're both eating pretty low on the food chain and all that mercury comes from the atmosphere, if a trout was in mercury-rich freshwater, it could get pretty high mercury levels too. The ocean's not especially bad for mercury, it's just the place where everything ends up. We'll explain, this will make more sense later, I promise. We do this in 4 units. 3 units. Salmon basically just waddle down to the river and go, yup, and then a fish will come by and they just grab it and they walk like 20 feet to where it's cool and shady. And then if you've never seen this, it is horrifying. They only the parts of the salmon that we throw away, and they throw away all the part of the salmon that we pay 20 bucks a pound for. It's so frustrating. I've seen a grizzly bear walk with like, I don't know, 45-pound Chinook salmon, like the greatest fish of the sea. Take that thing all flapping like this, and the bear's just dragging it through the dirt, and the salmon's just, and I'm just like, ah! And they take that thing and they just go, ah! And they eat all the guts, because that's where all the fats and the oils are, and then they eat the head, and then they rip the fillet, and I'm like, come on, bro, 200 bucks. And they just throw that away, and then they eat the spine, and then they go back for more. Like, we could have shared that. We could have shared that. I will give you all the guts. Let me take the fillet. We call this a good deal, but they don't do that. In like a 3 to 6 week period, grizzly bears will literally double in body weight, eating nothing but the fatty parts of salmon. At the end of salmon season, grizzly bears are disgusting. A former student of mine went on to be a wildlife ranger up in Alaska, and she had a cabin where she lived year-round. And she said, oh, it's salmon season. I'm so bummed. I'm like, oh my God, are you getting salmon? She's like, oh yeah, I'll eat a salmon, but it sucks here. And I'm like, how could it possibly suck? You just walk outside and grab salmon. And she's like, yeah, well, the salmon's nice, but the bears stink, and they sleep right next to the cabin because it like blocks the wind and it's warm and it has shade. And she says they have like dreadlocks of like salmon waste, and their poo is just pure salmon oil. So it's like runny and stinky, and there's like flies everywhere. And she says literally from like 10 miles away you can smell when you're coming close to my cabin because the smell is just horrific. She says it's like worse than rotten sewage. I don't know if you all realize this, but grizzly bears live in a part of the world that's really famous for something else. The Pacific Northwest has a lot of water and a lot of trees. And remember the water. So those trees are really nice if you're into lumber. And you know, there was a moment when we Europeans got out west, and we were like, hooray, look at all these trees. And so we started cutting down all the trees, and we made lumber, and we built houses, and the West was one. Of course, it sucks having a remote lumber town with grizzly bears everywhere, because they'll eat your baby, they'll eat your goats. You might be like trying to find that one big tree at the end of the forest and a grizzly bear jumps on you and eats you and it's really scary. But we got rifles and they don't. So back in the early lumber days, we capped all the grizzly bears. And they're big, slow-moving, easy targets. You can trap them, you can poison them, you can shoot them. So watch this. Lumberjacks show up, get scared, kill the grizzly bears, grizzlies go extinct, wait 30 years, get ready. Trees stopped growing and the lumber industry stalled. Because?
Because isn't it a certain element in the salmon that they leave behind helps the trees grow?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
it nitrogen?
Actually, a whole bunch of them, but yeah, nitrogen's a big part of that, absolutely. All that protein, you know, you're supposed to eat fish for protein. Protein's made out of nitrogen, yeah. And nitrogen is fertilizer, and this is the largest fertilizer flow on Earth. Those salmon coming up on land. You know, with all the rain, all the nutrients wash away, and those fast-growing trees, with all that rain, they could grow as fast as you feed them. So, you know, every year, they'd be getting these, like, heaps of bear crap and salmon guts, or salmon meat, whatever, salmon remains. This is the single largest nutrient flow on our planet. No bears, no fertilizer. No fertilizer, no trees pretty soon. Turns out, bears are nutrient cyclers. Do trees eat bear?
No.
This doesn't show up on a food web. If you look at a food web, you say, I care about the trees. Bears not eaten by tree. So get rid of the bears. It was a reasonable assumption. I'm afraid of grizzly bears. I would shoot them too if my kids were playing out in the forest. I understand. But I might have shot myself in the foot because if I care about those trees, the nutrient cycling, a surprising connection. Of course, with the trees not growing, birds go away, other mammals go away. Without the trees growing, the entire forest ecosystem starts to collapse, all because we're afraid of grizzly bears. I'm moving on. Anybody know what these are?
Marmots?
It's so cute. No, not marmots.
Chipmunk.
But everybody says marmot. No, not chipmunk.
Groundhog.
Closer.
Muffer.
What?
Prairie dog.
Muffer.
Prairie dog, prairie dog, prairie dog, prairie dog, prairie dog. American prairie. Oh my God, they're cool. They are farmers. In the fall, they run around through the grassland and pick up seeds. Then, when they've got a mouthful of seeds like a chipmunk or a squirrel, they go down underground into their tunnels and they stash all of those seeds in dry storage. They dry the seeds first on their chest and then they put them away one at a time. And then, later on, when they're hungry, they take a handful of those seeds and they move them to another part of the tunnel where it's wet. And they put the seeds in the sprouting bed and then they eat the seed sprouts. That's so rad. That is so rad. Everything is so much cooler when you find out if it's cool or not. I think of all the cool stuff that we didn't know was cool.
Like, oh wow, go figure, that is kind of cool. Like, should have paid attention. It's a big old grassland, which is a really nice place to feed your cattle. So, you know, when Whitey's coming westward, we're like, oh my God, look at all that grass. It's like waist-high grass. So you say, go ahead, cow, run, be free. And the cow goes, awesome! And it's just galloping across the prairie, and it sticks its hoof into one of these prairie dog burrows, and its momentum carries it forward. It breaks its leg, and you have to shoot it. What a waste. I brought that cow all the way from Massachusetts. So get this funny moment in U.S. history. We enlisted our children to become exterminators, and it became a very common practice around America for children to get these boxes of .22 long rifle ammunition and kid rifles. I have one of these historic, like back in the day, 22s that was given to every kid when they turned 5 or 6 or 7. And you go, all right, kid, have a nice day out there. Daddy's going to work. Go shoot some prairie dogs. And kids got really good at this, and the .22 LR became America's like #1 ammunition. And kids became really good marksmen, and generations of Americans were raised with guns because we needed our kids to help wipe out the prairie dogs so that our cows wouldn't break their legs. Amazing, like U.S. history gun stuff. But the ecology thing is even, I think, even more interesting, or just as interesting. Prairie dogs are really easy to kill. When they hear a sound, they stand up. They're called prairie pickets. So you find a good place to rest your rifle, and then you just shoot one into the ground, and they'll go, brrr, and then you just go pop, 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 you just pick them up. This is a game at the county fair. It has evolved into many other games, but back in the day you would bring your own .22 or use their .22, and they would have these wooden pickets, like fence posts, and you would have to see how many you could knock over, and if you got all 8 with 8 rounds, you would get a stuffed teddy bear or whatever. They used caramel apples back in the day. Anyway, kids got good at it. We had an army of trained sharpshooters at our disposal to win our wars. Actually, interesting. And we got rid of the prairie dog, and our cows could run at high speed through a prairie that within a couple of decades stopped growing grass. If you want to fast forward U.S. history, we were forced to import European grasses, which aren't evolved for our climate, so they require a lot of nutrient inputs, a lot of water, and in some cases pesticides. So modern farming hit the US when we ruined our native grasses in the grasslands. This may have exacerbated the Green Revolution, and it may have exacerbated the Dust Bowl. For those of you who care about US history, this will all come up later in your senior year, I think. Anyway, junior year. Anyway. Anybody know the grass stopped growing?
Prairie dogs didn't like the seeds anymore?
Yeah, so there was a thing about the seeds, a predator effect, where they would stash seeds from a hot year, and 5 years from now, when there's no more of that on the surface because it's been cold for a while, digging through their tunnels, they would find an old stash of hot year seeds. So they would provide long-term storage to buffer plant diversity. You understand what I mean by this? Like it hasn't been hot in a couple of years, so there's no more hot seeds in the topsoil, but they've got a lot stashed from 5 years ago. So a predator effect for seed diversity. Anybody else want to guess what else they did? Yeah?
Didn't the tunnels do something to help, like, I don't remember, the book was talking about it, something about the air, I don't remember.
Yeah, aeration and nutrient flow, nutrient cycling. And by the way, those tunnels are critical for other species. It's a habitat issue. So it turns out the prairie dog is 3 different things. An example of the nutrient cycling, by mixing up the soil and mixing the layers and bringing up fertilizer and burying topsoil.
Turns out it's a habitat thing by giving a place to live for a bunch of species in the prairie. Turns out it's a predator effect where they maintain diversity of their prey by stashing the most common seeds, which gives you like long-term storage for seed varieties. All three of those. Isn't this neat? Am I the only guy that thinks this stuff is neat? I think this is neat. Anybody know what that thing is?
Alligator.
That's right, American alligator. Anybody know how they make a living?
Eating fish. Swamp people.
They eat big stuff, like storks and deer and swamp people. Now, there's a design problem with being an alligator. I don't know if you realize this. They have one of the fastest muscle movements in the animal kingdom. Have you all heard this?
Yeah.
You might know that they've got all these muscles dedicated to closing their mouth, but very few to opening. So even a small, frail child can jump on an alligator and hold its mouth shut, and when their mouth is shut, they can't hurt you, so you can just drag away your big old alligators. Go alligator wrestling. Kids learn how to do this. It's not a big deal. You can hold their mouth together with a little bit of duct tape or a string, shoelace, because all their muscles are for this one. Whoop out! And they just sit there like that guy. See, over here? And they wait for the dumb bird to walk by, and the bird only sees motion. That's a fun fact. Birds don't see things that are standing still. Like if you just stand perfectly still, the bird doesn't see you. So the gator's like perfectly still. And the bird's like, wow, that's a nice looking log. And the gator's like, come sit over here. And the bird does, and they go, whoop-ah! And now it gets funny, because imagine if you've got, let's make this more interesting, like a big old deer in your 3,000 razor sharp teeth in this killing machine of a mouth. But what the F are you going to do? You got these little tiny claws back here. You've all seen like the T-Rex memes? Like, this poor little alligator's like, I got this. And they got like, aha, hold deer. And meanwhile the deer's like, get me out of here, I want to go. They're just trying to run away. And you're like, nope, but dang it. So what's an alligator to do?
Eat smaller stuff.
Yeah, but that's not very efficient. Smaller stuff can sense them. Smaller stuff is pretty twitchy, you know. Smaller stuff is good at hiding. Smaller stuff isn't going to do this. You ever heard of a death roll? By the way, cell phone? Maybe if you put it behind the pencil case, Jose won't see it. I was totally born yesterday. Yeah, that worked until today. If you've got this big ass deer, you do what's called a death roll. That's actually a thing. Where the alligator goes, ugh, ugh, and that deer's just like, and it just breaks all their limbs. So now you have a live deer sausage that's crippled, but you still can't eat it because it's covered in all this tough skin. There's all these bones in the way. So then, they hop in the water, drown this thing, and stuff the carcass in a gator hole. There's these things called gator holes in the bayou, which are underwater caves, so that you can take your freshly drowned deer, stuff it in there, and let them rot for a while. When it starts to fall apart and get all stringy, the deer will go back to its gator hole and nibble on some stringy, decomposing deer parts, and then go back to the surface and digest, and they defend their gator holes from each other. And you've seen gators fighting on the surface, maybe, because they're not wanting to share their pond with another alligator. It's a beautiful thing to see. It's very interesting. Of course, you might have heard that alligators make for very expensive shoes and belts and briefcases. I think it's not a very attractive leather, but people like it. And alligators are stupid and gullible and lazy and slow moving, and they just stand there. Like if you walk up, they're like, I play log, and you're like, great for me, and so you can just shoot them. And then you can like fill a boat with like 3 tons of alligator in 10 minutes. I've seen alligators laid out on a pond, like shoulder to shoulder, like big 10-foot gators, just like hundreds of feet. Like you can just walk along and go bang, 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 reload, bang, bang, bang. I mean, they're, yeah.
Isn't there only like one spot that you can hit where you can actually kill it instantly?
I have heard that, but I have seen footage of alligator hunters and it doesn't look that way.
Well, I just see swamp people and they always hit it first try. That's what makes me think it's kind of...
I don't understand the, I don't know, man. Maybe, I mean, at this distance, I could probably hit like a
quarter-sized spot?
Yeah, quarter-sized spot reliably, I would think. 90% of the time. Anyway, we drove down to Extinction 2 locally, and check this out. The bayou disappeared. It became a grassland. The entire system stopped being what it used to be. Can anybody explain why that is? Oh! Before you do that, fascinating story. Some random bayou guy was out fishing at night, or in the evening, fell off his boat, doesn't remember what happened, woke up underwater in a little tiny air pocket like this. Like in water. Did like a little system check and goes, oh dang. Like both legs were broken, one of his arms was broken, his ribs were all broken, he couldn't breathe, he kept like snorting out blood out of his nose. He's like in the dark, in the mud, in the water, and he lives in the bayou, so he knows what's up. He goes, darn gator. And so he like held his breath, hauled himself out of the tunnel, bobbed to the surface with like one good arm, like dragged himself up onto some mud, spent I don't know how many hours getting eaten by leeches and mosquitoes, like waiting for one of his neighbors to drive by. Hey Ricky, get me on the boat! And so like his neighbor goes like, oh buddy, and like puts him on the boat, and the guy's like a motivational speaker now. I don't remember, but he had like 30 broken bones and like 10,000 stitches, whatever. Like the story, like he's all mangled, he's got all these scars, and so he's like, check this out, and, like this is work. Anyway. Why did we lose the swamp? What?
When they bring the prey to decompose it, the nutrients from that help.
You would think fertilizer, but the funny thing is that swamps are at the end of a waterway, and so they are sort of the nutrient dump of a river. So remember that everything flows downhill, and so rivers drain all the landscape's nutrients and dump them in wetlands. So those are the highest nutrient loads found in water anywhere, even without the gator. Yeah?
Isn't it because they dig the holes they dig?
It is, but what's that got to do with anything?
I'm not sure.
Watch this. Such a basic thing that you all knew it, you just didn't know it's important. Fast-moving water can carry big old stuff, right? Like flood waters can like move a car, and if it gets even further, it'll move a house. Even further, it'll move your mom.
Oh.
And as that water slows down, the heaviest stuff settles first, like your mom, and then like the house, and then like the car, and then the boulder, and then the mailbox, and then the little rocks, and then the pebbles. And as that water is just meandering, then the sand. And you can always tell when water is perfectly still because it's perfectly clear, because even the sediment will settle, right? Water flows downhill, and if it can go all the way out to the ocean, sediment accumulates off the coast, where water movement keeps it going. But watch, when you ain't got no gators, water stops moving, and literally the sediment will fill in the bayou until this is all grassland. And not only is there no home for the alligators to come back, but the birds are gone, and All the wetland fish can't get into there anymore. And this is what we call engineering an environment. The alligator is an engineer species. I'm sorry, please look up. There's a lot of associated terminology that's all the same. Environmental engineering is a discipline, like a type of science, but it also means biome engineering, like species that build the swamp or build the pond or whatever. They're called engineer species. We call them physical engineers or habitat engineers. These are all interchangeable terms. There's another one that you might already know. Can anybody think of a mammal that builds a pond and you wouldn't have a pond if you didn't have the mammal? Beaver. That's right. This guy, he built these dams. Someday when we've got more time, you gotta ask me to tell you the story. Beavers have air conditioning, heating, nurseries, secret entrances, bathroom at the end of the hall, and a dining room in their dams. They're kind of cute. If you taxidermy them, you can make them look really scary. And they're pretty fast growing. They have pretty good fur. They have a lot of fur. A big fat beaver is a ton of fur. You shoot 3 beavers and you got a trench coat. By the way, the first cage at the Santa Barbara Zoo when I worked there for a beaver had a wooden door. And they trained the beaver for human contact. It was one of the quote-unquote contact animals that you would walk around at a birthday party to the kids pet it or whatever. So I was nearby, like cleaning my cages, and the radio goes off. The code, I forgot what the number is. It was like code yellow, like a non-dangerous animal has escaped. I forget what the code number, code color was. Like a code red, whatever. Yeah, code red. And I'm like, what? And I see all these people running toward me screaming, and I walk down the path, and there's like some lady, like, like full on freaking out, and the beaver had like climbed up her leg and was reaching into her pocket looking for treats, you know? But she didn't know, and the beaver had been in his cage for like 17 hours before eating his way out. It was awesome. Beavers are pretty rare now in the mountains because we made a lot of trench coats. And when you get rid of the beaver, there's nothing to build those dams. You get one big flood and the dam washes away. And now that we don't have those dams, we don't have the ponds. This has affected populations of ducks, populations of fish. And by the way, it's affected human groundwater supply. Because a pond is like a big funnel that recharges groundwater, you know, it supplies more underground water storage. So human groundwater supplies were affected. Another engineer species, impact on humans. But I don't want to spend a lot of time here. I really want to talk about the last one. This will stretch for 2 days. I can't finish this today, so we're going to have to come back to this on Friday. But man, this is so neat. I really... let's review something. Let's review. Please look up. Food web stuff is easy. The sea otter is just a food web change. So 3rd graders understand the kelp stuff. And if you remember that kelp is where other species live, then you also understand the beginning of community level interactions. The first one was habitat. The second one was how predators maintain diversity by limiting competitive exclusion. You keep one from outcompeting the others. Nutrient cycles, like the bear, like the prairie dog, you stir up ingredients or help move nutrients around. Then we talk about engineered species, the alligator and stuff. And then there's one that's so complicated, we just call it the wolf effect. There is no way we could have seen this one coming. I can tell you the story, but I know I'm not going to get the punchline today. You'll have to listen really carefully so you can remind me tomorrow of where we left off. I'll rely on you to tell me, no, I've heard this and I haven't heard that yet.
So all of those examples are examples of community level interactions, right?
Correct.
Okay.
They're things that happen in an ecosystem that aren't in a food web. You could say there are other layers of a food web. You can connect them with a new set of arrows. Here goes the wolf effect. And how many of you saw the movie last night, by the way? So they talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of details they didn't mention. We kill all the wolves because they eat your baby and they eat your sheep and they can gang up on your baby horse and stuff. And coming west was scary enough. And it was a hard living for the first Europeans, and we killed all the wolves. Then somebody had a smart idea. Let's start setting aside some land for perpetuity so that America keeps a few natural treasures intact. It's like a really nice piece of china that after a while you realize I don't want to eat off this anymore, we should put it in the cabinet. And in one of those, Yellowstone National Park, some wolves showed up out of Canada. They were undocumented immigrants, I might add. They snuck through the border. They ran through some forest and some trees and some private land, and they showed up in Yellowstone. And the park ecologists were like, I don't know, I guess they're like naturally here and like they're a native species. Let's just leave them be and we'll see what happens. And within 30 years, everything changed in the park. Like everything changed. Like we're still measuring changes now, and it's been 20 years that we've been measuring changes. It's called the wolf effect because it's too complicated to fit any of these. It's all of them plus a bunch of other stuff. So I can tell you the story, and then the bell's going to ring, and then there's more stories. So keep track of the intro. I'm running behind schedule, so I'm going to go right to the bell. Keep track of these details. First of all, I look at this picture. I can tell there's no wolves in this environment for a long, long time. How can I tell? No, some elk grew to be old even with wolves around. What? Okay, what? What? Oh, there's grass. No, it's just a dry season. What? So, Yellowstone has forest, meadow, rivers running through the meadow. The absence of trees right there is not especially surprising. There's something else absent.
The environment by the streams.
What do we call that? Vocab term. Along a river is called riparian. It's all the stuff that's always green because it's along the edges of the river. Riparian. If you look at that picture, you see how it just goes grass to mud to river? That's not supposed to look like that. I assume that everybody understands how plants and water and roots and stuff would work. Since the river is there, there's always plants on the edges of the river, and they're always green because their roots are in the river, right? Thank you guys. This is simple, right? So please look up. Riparian vegetation is the stuff that grows along the side of the river. And wolves are scary, and elk are evolved to fear the wolves because the elk that lied wolves didn't have a lot of babies. So when there's wolves around, you'll have plenty of time to pack up. Don't start now. When there's wolves around, the elk hide in the forest. They look around and go, is it safe? Is it safe? And when they can't take it anymore, the elk will run across the meadow, chug, 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 chug river water, and then they'll run back to the forest. And every hunter knows, if you want to kill stuff, just find the water and wait. So the wolf has it easy and the elk has it hard. They all run back to the forest and they go, oh, okay, are we all here? And they look out and there's like a pack of wolves eating grandma or whatever, and like, oh, I guess we lost one. What that does though is elk live in the forest, wolves patrol the river, and thus nothing eats the riparian vegetation. But you can see here, that elk is not afraid of anything. He's got all 4 legs in the river. He's probably going to lay down and take a nap right there because it's cool and air conditioned. And he has already eaten every last little shred of green vegetation on the sides of the river. Now, I'll say one last thing and then you can pack up. What wolves used to do is change the behavior of elk. In the absence of wolves, fearless elk just chill in the river. On Friday, we're going to put the wolves back in Yellowstone, and the entire ecosystem will change because the elk are now scared again. It's called the wolf effect, and I'll explain more on Friday.